promote change or do work. Now, this can come in two major forms, either potential energy or kinetic energy. Right? So kinetic energy is associated with movement. Potential energy is due to how it's structured or located. So I really like this example of the bow and arrow up here. We see this individual is pulling back that arrow in the bow, right? Because of how that arrow is positioned in the bow, right? All they have to do is let go, and there's the kinetic energy. But because that position, it's there, it's about to happen, it's potential energy. It's the potential energy, right? So we have potential energy when we pull it back. When we release it, all right, now that arrow is moving, and we have kinetic energy. Right? There's a lot of different forms of energy out there. Some biologically important ones could be light, heat, mechanical, so things actually breaking, electrical energy like ion gradients. Right? We are only going to focus on chemical energy today because I think that's the most important to kind of start us off thinking about chemical reactions. So chemical energy is the energy in molecular bonds, right? So I really like this image here. We can see the lightning bolt is the energy. It is on the bond, right, between our two different atoms here, enzymes come into play. Enzymes can really speed up a reaction. So they act as catalysts, which is that agent that speeds up the rate of the chemical reaction. And enzymes are catalysts in that they're also not being consumed during the process. They can be used over and over and over. So enzymes, they are a protein. We worked with enzymes last week in the lab. Enzymes are going to increase the rate of our upheaval